You know that specific feeling of panic?
Oh, I do.
The one where you are staring at a microbiology syllabus and it lists about 500 different bacteria, and to your untrained eye, they all look like exactly the same tiny blob.
Staphylococcus, streptococcus, streptomyces.
Yeah.
It turns into alphabet soup very, very quickly. And usually, the panic sets in right about the time you realize the exam is tomorrow.
Instantly, you are drowning in Latin names.
Yeah.
So you grab the textbook, in this case, Lippincott Illustrated Reviews, Microbiology, and you desperately flip to chapter 32. It's titled Quick Review of Clinically Important Microorganisms.
Which sounds like a lifeboat. Quick review implies easy.
It is a lifeboat, but maybe not in the way people think. Usually quick reviews are just dry lists. But what caught my eye about this specific chapter is that it's actually a most wanted list.
Uh-huh.
It is a roster of the villains that actually kill people.
That is the best way to frame it. Microbiology is vast, but this chapter takes the thousands of bugs out there and filters them down to the ones you will actually see in a hospital bed. It focuses on the clinically relevant pathogens, their structure, their weapons, and the specific diseases they cause.
So that is our mission for this deep dive.
Right.
We aren't just reading a list. We are going to build a mental survival guide.
Huh?
We're going to categorize these threats so that when you hear a name like Clostridium, you don't just panic. You know exactly what weapon it carries.
And to do that, we have to ignore the alphabetical order.
Yes.
The book lists them A to Z in the text, which is great for a dictionary, but useless for your brain.
Right.
We are going to follow the visual framework in figure 32.1.
Mugshots.
We're grouping them by their mugshots, their shape, and how they stain.
Right. If you look at that figure, it divides the bacterial world into the gram-positive rods, the gram-negative rods, the oddballs that don't fit the rules, and the cocci. So let's start with the heavy hitters, the gram-positive rods.
These are the big purple staining bars under the microscope. And the text divides these into two very distinct gangs. The ones that form spores and the ones that don't.
And you have to respect the spore formers. Spores are essentially biological bunkers.
Really are.
These bacteria can go dormant, survive heat, radiation, dehydration, and then wake up centuries later to cause havoc.
Precisely. The headliner here is the bacillus group, specifically Bacillus anthracis.
Anthrax. Now, visually, the text describes these as blunt-ended bacillus that hang out in long chains. The image that always sticks with me is boxcars on a train track.
That's the classic look. Now, usually when we hear anthrax, we think of bioterrorism.
White powder in envelopes.
Right, which is the pulmonary form wool sorter's disease.
Okay.
Historically, people got this from inhaling spores off contaminated sheep hides. It is terrifying because it's almost 100% fatal if untreated. But the text makes a crucial distinction here.
It's not just the bacteria.
It's not just the bacteria multiplying that kills you. It is a chemical weapon attack.
The toxins.
Literally, they have an antiphagocytic capsule, a force field that stops immune cells from eating them, and then they secrete an edema factor and a lethal factor.
Lethal factor? They didn't get creative with the naming there, did they?
It does what it says on the tin. It disrupts cell signaling and causes massive necrosis. Now, compare that to its cousin, the Clostridium family.
Okay.
They are also gram-positive rods, also spore formers, but they are anaerobes.
They hate oxygen.
They thrive in deep, dirty wounds or sealed cans where there's no air. And this family includes Clostridium botulinum and Clostridium tetani.
Wow.
I always love teaching these two together because they are perfect physiological opposites.
This is the floppy versus stiff distinction.
Exactly. Botulinum toxin, which you find in bad honey or improper canning, blocks the release of acetylcholine.
Right.
Acetylcholine is the gas pedal for your muscles. No gas, no movement, you get flaccid paralysis.
Which is why they call it floppy baby syndrome in infants.
Right. But tetanus, it does the reverse. You step on a rusty nail, the spores get in, and the toxin tetanus spasm travels up your nerves. But it doesn't block the gas pedal. It cuts the brake line.
It blocks the inhibitory neurotransmitters.
Specifically glycine and GABA. So your muscles contract, but they can't relax. You get lockjaw, arching of the back. It is an agonizing way to die.
It's just amazing how similar the bugs are, but how different the outcome is, just based on which neurotransmitter they hit.
It really is.
Now, there are two other Clostridia we need to mention.
Clostridium perfringens is the brutal one. It causes gas gangrene. It releases alpha toxin that destroys tissue and ferments carbohydrates, literally producing gas bubbles under your skin.
Oh.
You can feel the crackling if you press on it.
And then there is C. Diff. Clostridium difficile.
The opportunist. This is a major hospital issue. It's often present in the gut in small numbers, behaving itself.
Mm-hmm.
But if a patient takes broad-spectrum antibiotics, you wipe out the good bacteria, keeping it in check. C. diff overgrows and releases toxin A and toxin B.
Leading to pseudomembranous colitis, basically severe explosive diarrhea.
Right.
It's a classic case of the cure causing the disease.
It is. And detection is usually by finding those toxins in the stool.
Okay, let's wrap up the gram-positive rods with the ones that don't form spores. We've got Listeria and Corynebacterium.
Listeria monocytogenes is the cold survivor. Most bacteria go dormant in the fridge, but Listeria grows happily at 4 degrees Celsius.
Wow.
That's why it's a risk in deli meats and soft cheeses. It's particularly dangerous for newborns and the immunocompromised, causing meningitis.
And the lab tip for Listeria.
Tumbling motility. Under the microscope, they flip around like acrobats.
And Corynebacterium diphtheria.
The choking angel.
Yeah.
Visually, they clump together on the slide looking like Chinese characters or a picket fence.
And clinically, it's known for that pseudomembrane.
Yes, a thick grayish coating in the throat made of dead cells and bacteria. It can get so thick it physically blocks the airway.
All right, let's flip the script. We are crossing the aisle to the gram-negative rods. This is the biggest section of the chapter.
It is huge. To keep from getting overwhelmed, let's organize this by body system, like a tour of the human anatomy.
I like that.
Let's start with the lungs and work our way down to the gut.
Okay, starting in the respiratory tract, we have Bordetella pertussis.
Whooping cough. And the name describes the sound perfectly. The bacteria destroy the ciliated cells in your airway.
The little hairs.
The little hairs that sweep out mucus, so you can't clear your airway. You cough and cough until your lungs are empty, and then you gasp for air with that desperate ooh.
The text mentions there are stages to this.
3 stages: catarrhal, which looks like a cold; paroxysmal, which is the severe coughing; and convalescent. It's famously called the 100-day cough because the recovery takes forever.
Moving down the list, we hit a case of mistaken identity. Haemophilus influenza.
Right. Before we knew about viruses, doctors thought this bacteria caused the flu. It doesn't. But it does cause nasty epiglottitis and meningitis in kids.
And the key takeaway here is the lab diagnosis.
Yes, this bacteria is a diva. It refuses to grow on standard blood agar.
It demands the premium stock.
Chocolate agar, which is just cooked blood, and it needs specific supplements, factor X and factor V.
I always use the Roman numeral trick for that. X is 10, V is 5. It needs 5 and 10 to grow.
That's the one. And rounding out the lungs, we have Legionella pneumophila.
The air conditioner bug.
Exactly. It lives inside amoebas, in water towers, and AC units. You inhale the mist, and you get Legionnaire's disease, a severe pneumonia often accompanied by diarrhea.
Now let's swallow these bugs and head down to the stomach and intestines. The enterics. This is E. coli territory.
Escherichia coli is the king of the gut, and it's incredibly versatile. It is the #1 cause of urinary tract infections. It causes neonatal meningitis, specifically the strains with the K1 capsule. And then there are the diarrheas.
The text serves up a confusing bowl of alphabet soup here. ETEC, EPEC, ESHAC.
Yeah.
How do we keep them straight?
Think about the symptoms. ETEC enterotoxigenic is traveler's diarrhea. Watery, unpleasant, but usually self-limiting.
Okay.
EPEC enteropathogenic mostly affects infants, but the scary one is EHEC, enterohemorrhagic E. coli.
Is this the one linked to undercooked hamburger?
Exactly. The famous strain O157, BAC H7. It produces Shiga-like toxins. It causes bloody diarrhea. But the real danger is HUS.
Hemolytic uremic syndrome.
Right. The toxin shreds red blood cells, which clog up the filtration system in the kidneys. It causes renal failure, especially in kids.
Speaking of nasty gut bugs, we have to talk about Salmonella and Shigella.
Salmonella comes in 2 main flavors in this chapter. You have Salmonella typhi, which causes typhoid fever.
And the famous story of Typhoid Mary.
A classic case of the carrier state. The bacteria can hide out in the gallbladder. Mary Mallon was a cook who infected dozens of people because she carried the bacteria but showed no symptoms.
Wow.
Clinically, typhoid gives you rose spots on the trunk and can lead to sepsis.
Versus the other Salmonella typhimurium.
Which is your classic food poisoning. Poultry, eggs, turtles, it causes enterocolitis.
And Shigella.
Shigella causes dysentery, bloody, mucus-filled diarrhea. The scary thing about Shigella is the infectious dose.
Oh, right.
It takes less than 100 organisms to get you sick. It is incredibly contagious.
Now, staying in the gut, we have Campylobacter jejuni.
Shaped like a curved rod or a gull wing. It has darting motility. It's also linked to poultry. But the big clinical correlation here is Guillain-Barré syndrome,
The paralysis.
an autoimmune paralysis that can happen after the infection clears.
And finally, the stomach survivor, Helicobacter pylori. This is one of my favorite stories in medical history.
Real Barry Marshall.
Very Marshall. For decades, doctors said ulcers were caused by stress and spicy food. Marshall said, no, it's a bacteria. No one believed him.
Right.
So what does he do? He drinks a beaker full of H. pylori.
And promptly gave himself gastritis.
But he proved the point. He won a Nobel Prize for drinking a beaker of germs.
He did. And the text highlights how H. pylori survives that acid bath. It produces an enzyme called urease.
Urease, okay.
This splits urea into ammonia, which is basic, so it creates a little alkaline cloud around itself, a spacesuit against the stomach acid.
And that urease is what we look for in the breath test.
That's it.
Okay, let's jump out of the human gut and look at the zoonotics diseases we get from animals.
Two big ones here. Francisella tularensis and brucella.
Francisella is rabbit fever.
Right. Hunters are at risk. It's extremely infectious. The text actually notes it is rarely cultured because it's too dangerous for the lab staff to handle without special containment.
Wow.
It causes ulcer glandular disease, a skin ulcer, and swollen lymph nodes.
And brucella.
Undulant fever. You get it from unpasteurized milk or cheese. The fever rises and falls in waves, and it survives inside your own phagocytes, making it hard to clear.
Before we leave the raws, there's one opportunist we have to mention, the hospital nightmare, Pseudomonas aeruginosa.
This bug is everywhere. Soil, water. But in a hospital, it infects burns, catheter sites, and the lungs of cystic fibrosis patients.
And it's so resistant.
It is famous for being resistant to many antibiotics, and if you see it in the lab or on a wound, it produces a blue-green pigment called piocyanin and has a distinct fruity odor.
Fruity smell, blue-green color. Got it. Now let's get weird. We're moving to segment 3, the oddballs. These bacteria don't follow the normal rules.
These are the bacteria that break the rules of the gram stain. Usually that's because their cell walls are weird or missing entirely.
Starting with the spirochetes, the corkscrews.
Borrelia burgdorferi is the big one, Lyme disease.
Transmitted by the Ixcos kick.
And the hallmark sign, the erythema migrans, the bullseye rash.
Right.
Red ring, clear center. If you miss it, the bacteria can spread to the joints, heart, and nervous system.
Then there's leptospira.
Found in animal urine. If you swim in stagnant water contaminated with rat urine, for instance, it causes Weil disease, which targets the kidneys and liver, leading to jaundice.
Okay, what about the ones that hide inside cells? The intracellulars.
Chlamydia is the headliner. It doesn't gram stain well because it lives inside host cells. Chlamydia trachomatis is the most common bacterial STI causing urethritis.
But the text also highlights trachoma.
Yes, a chronic eye infection that is a leading cause of blindness in developing countries.
And its bird-loving cousin.
Chlamydia satoshi, parrot fever. You inhale dust from bird cages and you get pneumonia.
Then we have rickettsi's.
Rocky Mountain spotted fever, another tick-borne disease. The rash is the key clue here. It starts on the palms and soles of the feet and spreads inward to the trunk.
That's a very specific pattern.
Very specific.
Now, what about the bacteria with no cell wall?
Mycoplasma pneumonia. It causes walking pneumonia. You feel crummy, you have a cough, but you're not bedridden. Now think about this. Most antibiotics, like penicillin, work by attacking the bacterial cell wall.
Like smashing the bricks of a fortress.
Right, but mycoplasma doesn't have a wall. It just has a membrane. So if you give this patient penicillin, it does absolutely nothing.
Right.
You're attacking a wall that isn't there.
That is a crucial clinical insight. You have to use different drugs, like macrolides.
Exactly. Then you have the rule breakers that have walls, but they are too waxy to stain. The mycobacteria.
The TB and leprosy.
Tuberculosis has a cell wall packed with mycolic acid. It's like a candle. Regular dye just slides off.
So you have to use the acid-fast stain.
You do, and when you do, they show up as these bright red rods. The text calls them red snappers.
TD is fascinating because it's a slow burn. Night sweats, weight loss, chronic cough.
It builds these granulomas in the lungs, little prisons made of immune cells trying to trap the bacteria.
And then there's its biblical cousin, a Mycobacterium leprae, leprosy or Hansen's disease.
Which prefers cooler temperatures. That's why it attacks the extremities, the nose, the fingers, the toes. And, weirdly enough, armadillos.
Armadillos.
Their body temperature is naturally lower than humans, making them the perfect incubator for leprosy.
Huh.
So maybe don't pet the armadillos in Texas.
Words to live by. Okay, final stretch. We've done the rods, we've done the weirdos. Let's look at the round ones. Segment 4, the cocci.
Let's start with the gram-negative diplococci. This is the Neisseria genus. They look like pairs of kidney beans.
Okay.
You have two main enemies, Neisseria gonorrhea and Neisseria meningitis.
Gonorrhea is the STI.
Right. Purulent discharge. It grows on Thayer-Martin agar. It can also cause eye infections in newborns if the mother is infected.
And meningitis.
The meningococcus, a major cause of meningitis. A key difference in the lab is that meningitis ferments maltose. Gonorrhea does not.
And the scary complicating.
Waterhouse-Friderichsen syndrome, bleeding into the adrenal glands.
And lastly, the gram-positive coccus.
The text focuses on enterococcus here. These are tough bugs. They can grow in 6.5% salt and in bile.
So, hospital-acquired infections.
Common cause of nosocomial UTIs and endocarditis.
And staphylococcus.
The text keeps it brief but vital. Staph aureus grows in bunches of grapes and is the most virulent. Staph epidermidis is just normal skin flora.
Whew. That was a marathon. We have covered a massive amount of ground, from the whoop of Bordetella to the tumbling of Listeria.
It is a lot to take in, but if you step back from the details, you see the pattern. Microbiology isn't just memorizing names, it's about detective work. You look at the clues, the shape, the stain, the specific symptom like a bullseye rash or rose spots, and you build a case.
And what strikes me, looking at this most wanted list, is how opportunistic these things are.
That is the final thought I want to leave you with. We spent this whole dive talking about pathogens, but so many of these, E. coli in the gut, Staph epidermidis on the skin, C. diff in the colon, they are already inside you. They are neighbors.
They're the normal flora.
Right. We are essentially walking ecosystems. We live in a truce with these organisms, but all it takes is a slip.
A weak immune system.
A course of antibiotics, a spoonful of sugar that helps the wrong bug grow, and the truce breaks.
The line between a friendly neighbor and a lethal killer is terrifyingly thin.
It is. We aren't just fighting an external enemy, we are managing an internal rebellion.
On that slightly unsettling note, we will wrap up this deep dive. Hopefully you now feel a little more equipped to handle Chapter 32 and the exam that comes with it.
I hope so.
A huge thank you to the Last Minute Lecture team for making this deep dive possible.
Just remember, wash your hands and cook your hamburger.
Thanks for listening. Catch you next time.